Often this question or this argument is raised that, hey, Paul had said when he wrote to the people of Corinth, to the Galatians, to the Colossians, to the Romans, etc., saying that you should not be following the biblical festivals and etc. But I want to show you today, and I'm not going to cover the passages from Colossians and Romans, but the principle is the same as what I'm going to talk about from Galatians, so that we understand and then we're able to apply it there as well. Now, he is writing to the church of Galatia, and in verse 9 of chapter 4 he says, "But now you do know God. So how is it that you turn back again to those weak and miserable elemental spirits? Do you want to enslave yourselves to them once more?" And then in verse 10 he says, "You observe days and months and weeks, etc., etc." And a lot of people would take this verse to say that, hey, Paul is telling us that we're not to observe special days or special occasions of the Bible, because he's criticized the people of Galatia and we need to apply that principle into our lives. But now let's look at it in a different way. Let's look at it actually what he was trying to really say in this passage. And for that we need to first understand who is the audience that Paul is writing this to. Now, if you look at your screen, you'll see that the audience here, and I've picked this up as part of somebody who's done an understanding and breaking down of who were the various geographical locations of these letters of Paul that went. Now, the Apostle Paul is writing either to the church of South Galatia, and that included Iconium, Lystra, and Derbe, established during his first missionary journey. Okay, so keep this in mind. Lystra and Derbe are part of Galatia. Okay, now how do we connect this up? Turn with me to Acts chapter 14. Now, if you have read this passage, and I'm sure you have, this talks about when Paul and Barnabas go to Lystra and Derbe, it says in verse 6, towns in Lycaonia and the surrounding country. Now they were there, okay? They were there among the people there. And in verse 8 it says, there was a man living there in Lystra who could not use his feet. And Paul, or Shaul, looking at him, said with a loud voice, "Stand up on your feet." And this man instantly jumped up and began to walk, and there was an absolute uproar that took place over there, because people were shocked. They saw the glory of God, they saw a healing take place, and they were absolutely shocked about it, because they knew this man. They knew that this man who was sitting there, he was crippled, he couldn't walk, and they actually saw an instantaneous creative miracle happening over there. And what was their reaction? It's interesting to see what their reaction was. They began to shout in the Lycaonian language, says, "The gods have come down to us in the form of men." And then they began calling Barnabas, they called him Zeus, and they called Paul, they called him as Hermes, since Paul was doing most of the talking. Now, why would they call Barnabas as Zeus and Paul as Hermes? Because they were worshippers of the stars and the planets. That's why. So they thought, oh, one of these stars, one of these planets, they've come down to us in the form of gods. You see? And they started to worship them. And Paul and Barnabas, they were upset, and they tore their clothes and they said, no, we're just human beings. I want you to understand that these were the same people that now Paul is writing to. You see, he's given them the gospel, he's brought them to the ways of the Lord, and now he's writing to them a few months or a few years later, to the people of Galatia, and he's saying, hey, you guys, what's wrong with y'all? You're going back to the very systems that you had come out of, right? He says, how is it that you turn back again? Do you want to enslave yourselves to them once more? Now you see, these were not people who were following the biblical feasts or the biblical festivals. These were worshippers of stars and planets and astronomy and astrology and all that stuff. And Paul is saying to them, now you want to come back to that system? What is wrong with y'all? He is not saying that you're going back to the biblical festivals, because they were never worshippers of Adonai. They were never people who were following the biblical festivals. They were following the pagan systems, and that is why they called Barnabas and Paul as the stars and planets who've come down. The gods have come down, they said. They were not following the biblical feasts at all. So this entire argument, or this entire thing to say that Paul is talking to us in Galatians and telling us not to celebrate the feast, it holds no water at all, because this was not a Jewish audience. This was not an audience that were following the biblical festivals. This was an audience that were following the pagan systems, and he's saying you don't go back into your pagan systems. You see?